What's a mook?
A mook? What's a mook?
You can't call me a mook.
I can't?
No.
I give you mook.
Hey guys, so yeah, we're back, and this is our first non-Halloween countdown episode. It's
That's right. Halloween is over. Or it's done with horror for now.
for now, but it'll never truly die in our hearts. For we are just moving on to the horrors of war.
That's true. Wow, we sure are. Yeah, we've been kind of following the theme of doing whatever's holiday themes. But, we have Remembrance Day coming up, and I always like to watch war films around this time. It's kind of like a way for me to remember things. It's like, okay, you have Remembrance Day, so let's take a moment to watch some of these great films that have been made and, remind yourself of what that was all about and what it was all like. And there's a lot of great movies that have been out there, so why not take the opportunity?
Yeah, I think sometimes, especially with all these wars, there's only so much creativity you could have with your imagination. And sometimes you really do have to watch these movies to understand what these people sacrificed and went through. And,
yeah, definitely. I do find, what is interesting is a lot of the documentaries I watch are in many ways more horrific than the recreations and stuff. I guess just because they're real stories, and hearing people recount them, it's like, damn, there's some real stories out there in the documentary land, and even a lot of existing footage and stuff.
Yeah, it's always more disturbing when you see real things. I guess there was always a little bit of distance I had with that documentary footage, because it was always kind of like, sort of old, grainy, overexposed black and white footage. But now with technology, now that I'm starting to see a lot of these things being, blown up into like 50 frames a second, and they're colorized, and I look at it being redone, and I'm like, this is way more disturbing, because it feels more real. You can actually kind of see something a lot more closer to reality being captured when they kind of revamp that old footage now.
Yeah, there was a Peter Jackson produced and maybe directed documentary that came out a little while ago. I think it was called, let me see if I can find it. I think it was called We Will Be Remembered or something. They Shall Not Grow Old is what it was called. So it's a documentary about, I think it was First World War footage. Yeah, a documentary about World War I with never before seen footage to commemorate the centennial of the end of the war. And it was very impressive documentary. It was all this restored footage, and it's it's World War footage like you've never seen it before. It's all in color, all really nicely restored, just kind of like how you're describing. And I'd really recommend checking it out for anybody who is curious or hasn't heard of it.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that. I wouldn't mind checking that out. It seems like Peter Jackson's starting to become like the king of remastering footage. Because I did see his Beatles, the Beatles documentary that his team also remastered, and so he's getting really good at cleaning up this old footage. And I'd be curious to see what he's done to the old World War I footage. It's probably a lot better than the colorized stuff that I saw.
Well, it's the Beatles Get Back documentary utilized some of the techniques that they had developed for this World War I documentary. So it's kind of interesting seeing that build on each other, and getting to have a lot of that rare stuff brought to us, and kind of making it possible to put people in those scenarios, whether you're on the battlefield in World War I or if you're in the recording sessions for Let It Be. So anyway, just a little mention of documentary stuff. We're actually going to talk more about some narrative films, though, like narrative. Well, I don't know if I want to call them fiction, but like recreation movies You know what I mean? What's the word for that? Dramatized movies.
War
yeah.
films.
yeah, war films that
Yeah.
are dramatizations.
Yeah, because I guess it's some of them are just flat out fictional stories that might be slightly influenced by maybe a real thing that happened, and then other ones are actually adaptations, and then some of them are almost very detailed recounts of specific events that happened. So you get it's a whole mixture there.
Well, for instance, the one we watched tonight, and Oliver and I did just watch a movie tonight, All Quiet on the Western Front, the 2022 version of the film.
And this is the only. We were talking about this a bit before the show. I think I've seen the one from I don't know if it's like the 60s or the 70s. I think we watched that in school. I don't remember it too well, but
yeah, I haven't seen the other two at all. So,
yeah.
But I know one of them was really well acclaimed. I think we were talking about it, and yeah, it's like the one from 1930. I think is considered the real gem.
Yeah, I believe that won the Oscars for Best Picture for 1930 or maybe 1931.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but I do have a feeling it might have been the winner for that year, and I've yet to see that. I was actually I was really close to considering when I decided to watch this movie. I was thinking of watching it actually last night, and I was kind of juggling between, should I watch the 1931 or should I watch the new one? Because I do genuinely, if the original is really well acclaimed, I do try to watch the original before I'll get to any remakes. But I wasn't quite in the mood for like a 2.5 hour movie from 1930. I was kind of more excited about watching the newer one.
Yeah, I think in some ways I'd be more interested to watch it now to compare it to this newer one.
Yeah.
Which was in German.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if the original ones were in
I'd be
English.
I'd be very surprised if in 1930 they gave it to a German movie. I would imagine it was strictly more like American Academy titles at that point.
Yeah,
so I'm
what's
pretty
interesting to consider about that too is that would have been made before World War II then as well.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
it was if it came out in 1930, that means it was technically one of like the earliest 1920. It would have been shot in like 1929 and been one of the really early sound pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, yeah, I was curious about it on a number of reasons. I was kind of curious about what the acting would have been like, but also really curious to know how they went about doing the battle sequences for a movie like that.
Yeah, there's a trailer here on IMDb I'm tempted to turn on.
I'm trying to
I don't know if that's going to come through on my microphone at all, but it's...
like look at the reflection on
it's-
your other monitor to like see
Oh,
the footage.
Yeah, usually I can flick that on, but
Yeah.
that would be interesting to check out. It looks like there's probably a lot of dialogue and drama scenes and stuff, which this new one did too. I don't know. Maybe we should talk a little more about the new one. But I am curious about the one from the 70s too. It was 1979.
Oh, okay.
And it looks like, is it black and white? Oh, no,
Maybe
it's
just
in color.
Probably just very desaturated or something. Yeah.
The 79 one looks pretty good too. But
Okay.
obviously these have been getting, like the production value seems to get more and more ramped up each year. But it is cool. There's a little video here that's kind of comparing different frames. And they're all about the same thing. It's about a soldier who goes and joins the war quite enthusiastically and then is subjected to the horrors of it and kind of faces the reality of what it's all about.
Yeah, in some ways it's almost like the basic universal kind of war film premise where it's, you're kind of following through the eyes of this main character who is sort of experiencing everything new and for the first time, kind of like the audience. And then it almost becomes, and this is a thing about this movie that has similar to a lot of the other war movies that I really love, is that it seems like they're usually a little bit light on plot. It's not like you're exactly following a specific mission, and it's almost like you're really just watching a series of like little mini like sketches or moments, and they all kind of add up into this overall movie, but they almost are also little like just standalone sequences in of themselves. And this is something that I've sort of noticed with movies like Apocalypse Now and Platoon, and even kind of I've noticed it with the one that we saw, All Quiet on the Western Front, which is why I'm kind of curious if those other versions of the movie, if they have like verbatim the same kind of sequences, or maybe very different sequences, maybe thought up by the writers, but just that they kept the overall theme of the story the same.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm curious about too. That's where, like I said, after watching this one, I am kind of more interested to compare it to the other two. But I don't know. Maybe there's somebody out there in our listener group who's seen the other two, and they can shed some light on that if they're similar at all or not. But yeah, I was bringing it up as a bit of a reference to a story which is made up. Like, I think the story is, I think it's based on a novel, actually. Not sure.
I that makes sense.
I thought it said something like about that in the credits, that it was like based off, this popular book.
Well, I think especially like the fact that the movie was made so long ago, the original one, I think it was almost rarer back then for just screams to be kind of completely originally written. You would get them, but I think especially like back in the 20s and 30s, the easiest thing for them to do would just, they had this extensive amount of, literature that, all these titles that weren't being adapted. So I think especially with older movies, there's a much higher percentage that the story that you're watching is oftentimes based on a novel or even just a short story. So yeah, I would probably think that there's probably a book, All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah. I don't think it's about like a specific guy's life story or memoirs or whatever anyway. Like a lot, because obviously a lot of war films they'll be based off like, the life of Oscar Schindler or the life of Private Ryan. Just kidding. I don't think that's a real story, is it?
It's not. I don't think it's a real story, but that's again. There's probably some truth to a situation like that happened in real life. Like I'm assuming that there probably was maybe some sort of written law that if you have so many siblings that are all being signed into the war, and if they're all if 4 of the 5 die, you get your 5th son saved, and he gets to go home. I could easily see that being a rule. I mean, they kind of go into that in Saving Private Ryan. Like they don't go into long detail, but that seems to be an established rule in, I don't know, the military system, at least at that time. So I'm sure there had to have been probably at least one situation where that played out, where there was just a guy who all of his brothers were killed, and I don't know whether there was a story about a whole platoon, having to go and find him. I don't know. Maybe there was easier ways of finding a particular soldier. But yeah, I would think that there's some truth to the Saving Private Ryan idea, at least.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so for this movie, I don't know. We didn't really talk about it after watching it. We just watched it a couple hours ago. And what did you think about the movie?
I really liked it. It'll be interesting to see in time how much I'll remember this movie, because there's other great war movies I've seen, but I only saw them once, and I don't know if it's just getting older with my memory, but yeah, certain movies I'm like, I'll end up kind of remembering little small things. But like, here's another good example, and I think this is a not bad comparison to what we just saw, would be the movie 1917.
Yeah, I was going to mention that one too.
And I remember really enjoying it, and I was very impressed with a lot of it, but there's not a ton of things I remember about that movie. If I was to bring them up.
Yeah, in terms of specific scenes or moments and stuff.
Yeah.
And see, that's the sort of thing where I could see myself wanting to rewatch a lot of these, in subsequent years, probably around this same time of year. I tend to like reserve horror films for October, and I reserve war films for November. But I would like to rewatch 1917, and I'd like to rewatch All Quiet on the Western Front and become more familiar with it. It's just, I find it quite an enjoyable experience to watch, even as though they're like, showing like the brutality of war or whatever. I don't know. This movie, All Quiet on the Western Front, beautiful to look at for one thing, just because in spite of the gore and all the like hardcore people getting mutilated and stuff, it's just shot really beautifully, and there's a lot of great compositions and color, and wow, what a gorgeous film to look at. And it did win the Academy Award for cinematography as well, and no surprise, really.
Yeah, I think rightfully deserved. I think that's one of the definitely one of the highlights of this movie is the cinematography. It's probably the first thing you notice when you start this film. And
I'm looking at 1917 here too.
Okay.
So that came out in 2019. For some reason, I did not think it was that old. I thought it came out more recently than that. But anyway,
just before the lockdowns, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I was going to say, but I think with war movies in general is, there's just been, at this point, there's been so many war movies, especially 20th century wars. I mean, more World War II movies than World War One, but there's obviously a fair amount of World War One movies. And, I think probably to some degree, there's a bit of maybe war fatigue with audiences in war movies. It's like, maybe like how many can you really watch? And so I think now when they make them, the thing to really make them stand out, if you're going to do a modern one, is, I do find that they're getting much more cinematic. And I find that with both 1917 and All Quiet on the Western Front, like they're just very beautiful. I mean, in some ways it's like ugly material that you're looking at, but it's shot as beautifully as it can. Like a lot of these sort of like sweeping, almost kind of like crane shots.
Yeah.
I mean, Roger Deakins shot 1917, and he's almost kind of, he's probably, maybe the biggest modern cinematographer right now, maybe. I don't know. He's up there. And I'd say like his work in that movie is one of the highlights.
Yeah. And
maybe the star of 1917.
That also won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography again, too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting because, these movies share that in common. They're really impressively shot, beautiful to look at. Of course, the big sort of gimmick, I guess you would say, with 1917 was that it was all designed to be like a one-shot film.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a really interesting and cool way a unique way of telling that kind of story, in terms of creating this immersive experience, which I think there's a number of war films that really try to do that, where they're trying to put you in the action of like a war scenario. Obviously, Saving Private Ryan did it quite famously, and to a lot of great praise by actual war vets. 1917 does it very effectively by doing the one-shot thing. And then this movie does it as well through a whole bunch of different sequences. But what you're saying about like the war fatigue, it's like, yeah, if you line up those three movies and watch them all in a row, it's like, wow, how many more trench warfare action sequences can I endure for before it becomes kind of desensitizing or a little bit boring to some degree, where you're like, okay, more explosions and dirt flying in my face and crawling in the mud and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are much bigger war fans than you or I, and they probably watched every kind of war film that they can get their hands on. And so those are the people I kind of am curious about. They probably have like the highest expectations of, show me something different, because they've seen it all. And so it's like, what's the point of seeing another thing unless you're going to kind of take it in a little bit of a different place, or you don't have to necessarily even like top the last great thing. But yeah, like you got to do something different. You can't show me exactly what the previous movies did. it's this kind of evolving function, I guess, with this like genre. And but I mean, yeah, the the violence seems to improve more and more, and I think that's kind of where actually CGI effects can actually be very useful. Where if it is like a long shot, where it's all done in one, you can kind of, have a sort of an actor with a clean face, and then as they maybe fall down, you could add some digital effects, to make it look more like a corpse or somebody who's really wounded.
Yeah, well, for instance, some of the sequences in this movie, there's like that scene where he's bashing the guy's face in with his helmet, and I don't know exactly how they did that, but it's like each time he gets hit, his face is more and more, battered up, and more bloody and things like that. Like, I'm kind of curious what they did to create that sort of effect with makeup or with visual effects or what.
When I was paying attention, it almost did look like there was almost like a cut before each impact, but it was but there was some sort of digital thing that smoothed it out where it didn't fully feel like a cut, but you could tell that something you could tell that there was like a few frames that just kind of were either taken out or just were adjusted. It seemed like I could tell that there was an effect being done there that most likely was like digital, but it was pretty close to seamless.
Oh, okay. Well, so, even if, actually now that you mention that, even if you wanted to do, say, something like a jump cut in the middle of a fast action sequence, that could probably work quite well, right? If you're just looking over the guy's shoulder and he takes one smash at his face with the helmet, if he repeats that action, you can probably easily enough do a seamless jump cut to a new shot now of the guy's makeup having been changed. Yeah.
I think the real trick is like the motion blur, right? Like it would be way harder if it was like a slow, peaceful sequence where nothing was happening. But when it's really fast, it's surprising how easily your eye, can't catch fast things and it'll fill in the blanks. It's a little bit off topic, but it kind of reminds me of a similar effect. And I think this was just like a weird little like YouTube video that was maybe meant for marketing for a horror movie, but it was made to look like a girl on a webcam who, while she's on her webcam, like I think something like possesses her. And then she just starts like smashing her head into her desk. And each time she like lifts her head, it's like a bigger bump until her head's just, like super bloody. And the way it was done was it's every time she slams her head, it's a cut. And then they would, kind of add a different prosthetic to her head. Yeah. But it was the fact that she does it so quickly. And you have to do certain things, right? Like you can't really be you can't make your positions too out of place.
Yeah. She's got to hit more or less the same target every time, probably.
But it worked. Like if you have like the right editor and good makeup people, you can actually effectively do those sort of effects. And so I had a feeling that there was something kind of similar like that with All Quiet on the Western Front for sequences like that. If you're just continuously like beating somebody and you're literally seeing their face just get bruised and bloody. It's almost like my brain like just automatically sees that as an effect now because I know it's obviously not real, but yeah, it's getting more and more believable, I find.
Yeah, it's kind of like Saving Private Ryan sort of set this standard for realism, and then a lot of war films since then have actually risen to the occasion and delivered some very convincing, believable, realistic on-screen graphic violence scenes. And it's now sort of like the expectation,
Yeah, as I think it should be. I mean, if you're gonna do a war movie, it better be brutal.
Yeah, well, and depending on what you're trying to showcase too, like what the perspective is, I guess. There's a variety of different war movies that the perspective they're showing isn't necessarily one of being right there in the trenches. Like they're putting the audience more in the position of military commanders, or it's more like a political war film, things like that. Putting the audience in the war room like the strategy room as opposed to in the trenches.
Or if you're like a fighter pilot, or maybe you're stuck in a submarine.
Oh yeah, totally. Very different kind of movie, hey?
Which almost makes me want to, just by bringing up the submarine thing, I was going to maybe segue a second here and just ask, have you ever seen Das Boot?
Yeah, I watched that movie when I was pretty young, actually. It was like one of my dad's best friends was quite a fan of that film, and I think they lent it to us, and I watched it.
And that's another long one, right? That's I remember.
I remember it was 2 videotapes.
Yeah, I remember I decided at one point to see the director's cut, which is like a 4-hour movie at least.
Wow,
it might
really?
even be longer. I was just like, holy shit. But I was like, if I'm gonna do Das Boot, I want to watch it all. And yeah, I mean, looking back, I think if I was to watch it again, might just watch the 3-hour version.
Yeah. What's that thing going off? Is that your phone or?
Yeah, I thought I had this on silence.
Oh, that's okay. I better turn mine off too.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. So we were talking about Das Boot.
Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't just say Das Boot is the greatest submarine war movie. I would say Das Boot might be the greatest submarine movie, period. I mean, I don't know if you could think of a better one, but to me, I'm like, Das Boot is the submarine movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen that many, but I've seen like that one, and then The Widowmaker. I think.
Okay.
What was it, like K-19?
Right. Yeah. And to be fair, I haven't
Ford,
seen a bunch. I haven't seen a ton of submarine movies myself, but like, I don't know, Crimson Tide comes to mind, Hunt for Red October, but the thing
what was that one? Down Periscope.
Oh, yeah, I got to still see that one. Yeah. So you know what? I think
Das Boot is not the greatest.
You've probably seen
submarine
more
movie. Down Periscope is.
Yeah, well, I think you've seen more of them than I have actually. So
well, I haven't seen Hunt for Red October though.
Okay.
Or what was the other one you said?
Crimson Tide.
I haven't seen that either.
Okay, they're good. They're just like, you could tell that they were. I think every submarine movie that came after Das Boot was influenced by it. The thing that was really impressive about that movie is that it's a 40-year-old movie, and it was just so ahead of its time. I mean, if you want to talk about another movie with great cinematography, it looked like it was made at least in the 90s, if not even like the 2000s. Like it just it's a beautiful movie, and the lighting in there, like it's again, I was shocked at how old it was. There was I
mean, it's not a movie that really depends on much that would date it, I guess, right? It's just, having the submarine set. It mostly takes place inside the submarine. I'm sure you get some underwater shots, but you could do that stuff quite convincingly with models. Probably better than you would with CG, really. And I think that's probably how they did any of those. I can't even remember if they had any of that type of stuff, but I imagine they did.
I think so. Yeah,
it's
for
just, like a set, costumes. It's mostly like basically the tension of what's going on in the boat and stuff. Hey,
yeah, like all of the other movies that he made after that in the 80s, to me, seem far more dated than Das Boot. Like, I love Neverending Story, but to me, Neverending Story seems a little bit of a movie of its time.
Yeah,
Same
but
thing
again,
with Enemy Mines.
That's partially because of what it's trying to do, right? Like using all these old animatronics and things like that. Trying to create a fantasy world is a lot different, I think, than making like a realistic war movie, especially in the confines of a submarine. Like that's just. Well,
I mean, even just little small things like the other movies just kind of seemed like grainier. They just the sets looked more like sets, and Das Boot, it's so crisp, and like there's really good contrast between like the shadows and light in that movie, and like the red lighting, and I think sometimes there's like some blue lighting, and I don't know, it was like a movie where it just seemed like so, and I think it was a well-known cinematographer. I want to say like Jan de Bot maybe was the DP for that movie, who later went on to do a ton of big Hollywood action movies, and then he himself became a filmmaker. But it was like, I think Jan de Bot might have also have done Die Hard. I think he was the cinematographer possibly for Die Hard, and he was like this guy who just seemed to have this cinematography style of the future, where like later like 90s Hollywood was like, okay, this is that shiny quality that we're going to try to make all of our movies kind of look like. But
Yeah, this was who you're talking about, Jan de Bont? Or who?
hopefully, this is who I think might have been the cinematographer for the movie. If I'm wrong, then I should just stop talking about this right now. But I know it was someone like Jan de Bont, and I think Jan de Bont's German, so I don't know. It makes sense. Like he did a lot of stuff for Paul Verhoeven, and I think he was. It would make sense that he was doing some stuff for Wolfgang Petersen too, but like I think he later. I think his directing debut might have been Speed.
Okay.
But I'm not an expert on him. So, but I mainly, just to me, that's one of the things that always had a big impact with Das Boot was, it just looked like it just seemed like a movie made like, a good 10 or 20 years after its date. And I was expecting I was expecting it to look a lot more like a lot of other sort of foreign European movies I saw. And the second it started, I was just sort of like, other than the subtitles, this is a glossy Hollywood movie. Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember much from Das Boot yourself? Like, I don't know if it's
not in terms of the. Yeah, it's been so long. I mean, I watched it probably when I was like, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, something like that.
But you remember when the boot shows up, right? That big boot.
Does that happen?
No.
I knew I was expecting a boot, but then, yeah. But that would be another great one to rewatch, to be honest. Again, especially because it's been so long. Mm-hmm. I guess I haven't been crazy into the idea of submarine movies because I do find they're kind of like those confined to one location sort of.
Well, they're very
things.
Claustrophobic, right?
Yeah. And it's not that I really have a problem with that so much, but it's just I'm not all that big into movies that are kind of more or less one location. Like, okay. You got Reservoir Dogs. It mostly takes place in the garage or whatever. You got Phone Booth. Mostly takes place in a phone booth. Those are cool movies, but I'm not as excited by them as I am by a movie that covers a broader range of locations.
Yeah, I do get a little bit more. I could be more nervous if it's a movie all set in one location because I start thinking like, okay, is this a play adaptation?
Yeah.
But if it's good characters, honestly, like I've seen a lot of great movies in one location. So.
Yeah. Well, I was going to bring up I don't know if this is in some ways a similar movie, but I tend to like movies that take place on airplanes. So for instance, and I know you haven't seen this one, but Executive Decision used to be one of my favorite movies. And the vast majority of the movie takes place on an airplane. It's these like special forces U.S. soldiers who have to get on board this hijacked U.S. flight in the middle of the air, and then they have to like sneak around and defuse a bomb and go through a whole like counter-terrorist operation to save the plane. But it's a great movie. There's so much tension in it, and it all takes place on the airplane. I don't know. So
you love airplane movies, but you hate submarine movies?
Yeah, I guess.
Because I feel like it's the same. It would be the same logic, more or less.
No, but airplanes are just more like comfy.
Well, yeah. I mean, and we've had experience on planes. I don't know how much experience you've had in a sub. But
not much. I mean, I've been on a few submarine tours because I went to like Pearl Harbor and somewhere in Seattle. I think I toured a submarine.
Yeah.
So there's been a couple that I've gotten to check out, but
well, anyways, yeah, we don't have to, I guess, focus too much on the submarine stuff. That was just, I guess, I kind of got my submarine movie out of the way there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Worth mentioning though, because I guess what's cool to me and what's interesting about all these war movies. And again, there's just countless of them, is there was so much going on in the different world wars. There's just so many different stories to tell. Stories of the Air Force, stories of the Navy, stories of the military, stories from Germany, stories about Japan, stories about Africa. There's just such a plethora of different experiences, perspectives, events and settings in which you can set these movies. And that's what's, I guess, kind of always continuously interesting to me about war movies, because I do tend to like them. I do tend to enjoy watching them. And I get excited about them partially because I like the process of being taken back to that older time period and being given an experience there.
Do you have a favorite war? Or maybe a favorite war that you like to see when it comes to movies?
Well, if I could quote that guy from Small Soldiers, it's like, I think the Second World War was the greatest of the wars.
I don't
can't remember what
was
exactly
was there more
says.
of it? Did he go into more of it than that?
No, it's just kind of this offhanded comment that he makes.
Yeah.
Oh man, who is that actor? It's just hilarious.
I think it might. Is it Tommy Lee Jones who does the voice? Of,
no. It was the dad of the neighbor who's kind of always being a pain in the ass.
Okay.
It's just hilarious.
See, for me, I think it's at least cinema. I would agree with you. I think like the Great War is World War II. It just seems like it's either the most. It just seems like it's the most famous and iconic.
Mm-hmm. There's so much that's iconic about it, right? Like just
even
wow.
like even now, it's like Nazis are more popular than ever. Like they're still relevant. People love talking about them. But for me,
well,
like,
it's hard. It's like impossible to get that out of your mind. Like it becomes this permanent fixture as like an identity that's so instantly recognizable. I mean, people from all over the world would be able to tell you about it or know about it and can picture it. I
guess it's just a question of like, when will it start to kind of like, as with all wars, like, there over time it will kind of fade away. Like there will, it's hard to think about, but there probably will become a time where the name Adolf Hitler might be as well known as Oliver Cromwell,
Yeah.
So
I don't know though. I mean, I kind of feel like, because I think back to say like the Roman Empire, and I think there's a lot of stuff that's very iconic about the Roman Empire too, or even like Egyptians. Obviously, the Nazis had a substantially shorter reign than either of those groups, but when you look back historically and the influence that some of these things had in causing the world to take shape, I don't know. I could still see the Third Reich, or whatever you want to call it, being kind of a permanent fixture there in people's memory as we look back at history.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I'm not saying they'll be like completely forgotten, but maybe just there won't be any real sort of power maybe associated with it in the way, like if you look at some of, I don't know, in the, like if you bring up the name Genghis Khan, like the room doesn't go silent.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, or even like if you bring up, I don't know, Emperor Caligula.
yeah.
It's like,
if anything, at this point, there's probably people be like, hey man, I kind of liked Caligula's some of Caligula's thoughts there,
See, I had a funny thought.
Not want to be on the receiving end of Caligula, but people could be like, hey man, that's the weird thing, is like when enough time goes by, they almost just find a fascination with these characters because if enough distance is there.
Exactly. There's not as much. Like I had just like a funny joke popped into my head a little while ago where I was thinking about hate groups, and it would be shocking to be like, I really want to join a Nazi hate group. People would take that very seriously. But if you were like, I'm going to join a group of neo-Romans, it's just like a funny, it's just laughable, right? Because nobody cares. It's so far in the past.
Yeah.
It's not like a threat anymore.
Well, that's what
people are very much threatened by the lingering existence of neo-Nazism and stuff like that.
Yeah, until so much time goes by that it sounds like saying a neo-Roman.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
I guess time does heal all wounds.
It will happen eventually, I guess.
Yeah. Just going back to, though, the favorite wars, I was going to just say, though, in my case, I'm pretty sure cinematically, I think my favorite war would be Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
If I was given the choice, if they were like, Oliver, you can only make one war movie, but you get to choose it, I would be like, give me Vietnam.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's, I think it's, so part of it goes into it's the environment. I love, unlike some of the other wars, I just love the location of the jungle. I love just seeing like those kind of green.
See, that's one of the reasons I'm not as big a fan.
Really?
Of it.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so weird. Like to me, it's like almost every other kind of like war location is just so much more depressing looking. While there's something like about Vietnam that's kind of exotic and just kind of like pretty, like just kind of like hiding in the jungle. But the other thing about Vietnam that I love is it's the best soundtrack. Of all of the war movies, you get the killer soundtracks when you make a Vietnam movie.
Why is that?
Because Vietnam was in the 60s.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, so you can incorporate the music and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
And it's also just the attitude of it. I can kind of relate. I like how Vietnam was this sort of more nihilistic kind of war. Like the people who were involved in that war didn't want to be there and they weren't really honored after it ended.
Yeah.
It was just kind of these guys who were either kind of trying to dodge prison.
Well, it's definitely not like a victorious. It doesn't lend itself much to any kind of a victory story, right? It's just almost all around kind of, yeah, I guess nihilistic is maybe the right word.
Well, it's also just like a war that we weren't really supposed to be there for. And so there's just like an interesting irony behind that. Like it almost seems like by design, every Vietnam War movie is kind of an anti-war movie by the sheer fact that it wasn't really a place we were supposed to be in to begin with. Mm-hmm. While at least with things like World War II, you could maybe argue like a little bit more justification there. But yeah, I just, and I think also, if I really had to boil down, my favorite war movies are the ones that I find the most rewatchable. They also tend to also be Vietnam movies. So,
did you ever see We Were Soldiers? I think that was.
No, I haven't seen We Were Soldiers.
I've been wanting to watch that for a long time, but.
So that is a Vietnam movie. Is that right?
I think so. Let me just double check here. Oh.
Well, it definitely makes me more interested.
Although, yeah. The story of the first major battle of the American phase of the Vietnam War, and the soldiers on both sides that fought it while their wives wait nervously and anxiously at home for the good news or the bad news. Yeah, I've been wanting to watch that for a long time, so we might have to check that out at some point. But
oh, I thought you saw it.
No, I have not.
Okay. Yeah, no, and the thing with me is like I'm always up for watching a new Vietnam movie. Although with that being said, is like I never feel like I'm gonna see like. The greatest Vietnam movies, I'm pretty sure I've already seen at this point.
Is your favorite Apocalypse Now? Because I know you love that movie. But...
Well, I mean, I don't know. Do we want to do like a little? Do we want to go through our lists a bit? We were thinking of doing 5 movies, and some we do 10.
Your answer
and
to the question.
Whether it's my favorite movie, huh?
Well, your favorite Vietnam movie.
My favorite Vietnam movie. Well, I will put it this way: it probably is. If there was any contender to Apocalypse Now, it would be Platoon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen Platoon. That's Platoon. Who made Platoon?
Oliver Stone.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Sorry, I guess I assumed that you would have seen Platoon.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I haven't seen. Probably because I'm just not as big of a fan of the Vietnam War. But I also don't know that much about Vietnam. Like, I'm not nearly as familiar with it as I am. I'm honestly not very familiar with the politics of it all. There was a really good documentary series on Netflix, I believe, that was like, I don't know, it's like 8-part series or something. One of my friends was telling me about it. And it was all about the Vietnam War. I wanted to go through it and watch it because I just thought it'd be good to get like some background and some context and stuff. So I have to get through that at some point. I'm sure I would find it fascinating. But,
well, I think you would. I think you would definitely like Platoon. It's different to Apocalypse Now, and yet there's also a lot of similarities. Like, I don't know if you're aware that Charlie Sheen is the star of Platoon.
Yes, I was aware.
So it's almost like, to me, like it's like the magic of a Vietnam movie means you have to have a Sheen. Vietnam is keen on the Sheen. Yeah. And it's not just the fact that Martin Sheen is the main character in Apocalypse Now and Charlie Sheen is the main character in Platoon, but they both narrate those movies. And it's like practically the same voice. It's almost like it almost could have been the same character. You could almost pretend that Platoon was the Sheen's character's arrival into the war. And then Apocalypse Now would have been like if he stayed in Vietnam. And I don't know if that was a coincidence. Like, I mean, you'd almost think that Oliver Stone would want to do everything he could to separate his movie from Apocalypse Now, but maybe he thought, oh, you know what? I don't know, man. Like, these Sheens, like they're great as these like narrators. Because again, yeah, it's just funny. Like they're my two favorite, and they were only made like less than 10 years apart from each other. And the thing about Platoon is it's very different in many ways. Like Apocalypse Now is this very cinematic movie. A lot of it almost doesn't even deal with Vietnam. I mean, it's based on a book called Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which was not about the Vietnam War, but they found it very fitting that you could turn it into a Vietnam setting. What's interesting with Platoon is what many people have considered the most realistic Vietnam movie ever made.
Okay.
And I think part of the reason for that is I can't think of another director. I'm sure there are other Vietnam vets who have become filmmakers, but nobody more famous than Oliver Stone.
I didn't know that he was actually a Vietnam vet.
Yeah. So that's the thing that's really unique about this movie is as it was probably at least the first Vietnam movie made by a vet.
Yeah.
And it feels very legitimate. I mean, this is what I've heard from vets who have seen the movie and attested to its being realism.
Yeah.
But it's much less glossy. It doesn't have the cinematography of Apocalypse Now. It's much more about the characters. Mm-hmm. And even though Charlie Sheen, you're seeing the movie through his point of view, the movie's really an ensemble. I mean, it's called Platoon.
Right. Isn't like, yeah,
it's got a ton
like Johnny Depp
Johnny Depp's in there, Willem Dafoe, Tom Berenger, Kevin Dillon, Forrest Whitaker, there's probably a few other Keith David. It's great and it's really rewatchable. Like it's one of those. It's almost like a hangout movie where you want to just watch it again and you want to hang out with kind of your friends who are these mixed bag of kind of crazy soldiers. Like they really kind of separate the two groups. There's kind of like the more sort of like hippie passive guys who like they kind of like, you know, smoke weed and chill out in their tents, and then there's the kind of more rough around the edge guys who are more into kind of like just like the drinking the beer and being more hard asses and stuff. And you kind of see these sort of divisions being made. And I mean it won Best Picture for 1986 or 1987. It was the Best Picture winner. And
yeah, well, I know it's always been a very highly acclaimed movie. And again, it's one of those classics that I haven't gotten around to watching.
Yeah. One thing you might find really interesting is that one of the first things that Oliver Stone ever did was after he got out of Vietnam, he started making some student films, and he made a movie in the early 70s, which was essentially like the precursor to Taxi Driver, to the point that like, I mean, I think he's even like he's wondered like, has Martin Scorsese or maybe Paul Schrader like seen this short film? Because it's very much the short film that Oliver Stone made wasn't really a Vietnam movie. It was more the Travis Bickle story of like the guy who's out of Vietnam and trying to like get his life back together. And it's like everything from kind of like, you know, like working out in his room and just kind of going crazy. And yeah, there was surprisingly a lot of similarities to Taxi Driver in this early Oliver Stone movie. And I guess
it was a short film, was it? Or
yeah. And but I mean, yeah, anybody who's kind of followed his career, he's like Oliver Stone's kind of been permanently trapped in the 60s and obsessed with it. You know, he's probably made at least 3 or 4 movies just about Vietnam itself. As well as a lot of other movies kind of set in that decade, like JFK and The Doors.
Yeah. To me, he's always seemed like a very kind of American politics kind of director.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like he focuses on a lot of that stuff. That seems to be like his kind of his...
Well, what's interesting is like the roots of all of that, I think, goes back to Vietnam. Like he is the Charlie Sheen character, and he was this guy who kind of was almost like too educated for his own good and decided to volunteer and was just completely disenfranchised from the experience. Mm-hmm. And then to top all that off, he comes back home afterwards and like, you know, people are like spitting on you. It's almost like they almost came back to a different America.
Yeah.
Because of all the the sort of revolutionary stuff that was happening in the late 60s. So they kind of thought at the very least, they'd come back with open arms, and instead they just kind of get all this like hate. And he kind of goes into that more with another one of his movies, Born on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
Which
that's another one that I've really been meaning to watch that movie. I was doing a whole Tom Cruise marathon for a little bit not long ago, and I just didn't get around to that one.
Yeah, it's I was surprised. For some reason, I felt like Tom Cruise wouldn't have been able to have pulled off the performance he did in that one, because that was kind of almost like his first real Oscar baity kind of movie. And yet, I actually think it's a really good Tom Cruise performance. It's more like it's not so much a war movie as far as battle scenes go. It's really it's a whole other kind of subgenre of war movies, which is like the aftermath of a war, veteran. Okay. And so that's really what the movie focuses on is a character like Tom Cruise's character who after the war he's a shell of a man. He's basically like a quadriplegic, and again just sort of being like, wow, I sacrificed all this stuff for my country and I got nothing in return but a bunch of bitter hatred, basically. But I've only actually seen that movie once. There's not a whole ton of things I'd be able to comment on it, but it's a good one. We don't have to stay focused on Vietnam. We can go back to it later. For
some reason, I always find that Remembrance Day, as a holiday, it always just makes me think of World War I and World War II for some reason.
Well, the poppies, right?
Yeah. And I think that's generally where it's emerged from. I think it was after World War I that it became like a celebrated holiday. And of course, apparently it's the whole thing.
It was a Canadian soldier who came up with the poem.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it was. Well, and of course it is the whole, we celebrated on the 11th day of the 11th month, right? So I guess there's inherently a fixture, that fixed date kind of ties it to World War I. So, you know what I mean? To celebrate the end of World War I. So,
do you want to? We could focus a bit on some more World War I titles, if you like.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should talk a little bit more about 1917, because I don't think we really got to talk too much about that. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I remember I enjoyed it. I just I hate to say it's not that while watching it I wasn't overly annoyed by the if you want to call it a gimmick about like the sort of the one shot kind of technique, but
yeah, no, I mean it's quite fascinating to just watch that, and I would totally recommend to people to check it out because it is very unique in how it tells that story, right? And being probably as a result of that one of the more immersive films of the subject matter.
I feel in my case, I was probably more impressed with it on a technical level as opposed to maybe like an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that just kind of came from the limitations that do come with the style of doing everything in kind of a, like, in one take. Where just, that wouldn't be my ideal way. Like if I had to choose, I would prefer the sort of style of All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah.
Where it just allows you, complete freedom to kind of just, cut away whenever you want and still have long takes, but not to be sort of
limited to specifically doing it that way
for the entire film. Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to prefer that kind of movie as well, where it's more, isn't it November the 4th? Not anymore.
What is it now, Kevin?
Remember the 5th of November. Okay, whatever. That's just me making.
By the time you guys are listening to this, it's actually going to be the 11th.
Yeah.
But while we're shooting this, it's Guy Fawkes Day now.
That's right, Guy Fawkes Day. Hey.
Yeah.
So there we go. Midnight Alarm. It is now November the 5th. Anyway, carrying on back into war movies.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I honestly don't really have a whole lot to say about 1917, but if you have some comments,
yeah, that's all good. We can kind of move on from there. I do find that there are a lot more World War II movies than World War I movies.
Mm-hmm.
But
like if there's one other World War I movie I wouldn't mind maybe just briefly bringing up, and then we can completely, I guess, maybe move on from it, unless you do have some other titles.
Well,
in
did
mind.
you ever watch Lawrence of Arabia?
I did, but
I know
okay,
that's like one of Spielberg's most inspired films. Like,
well, the music is very. I can't remember who the composer. I used to think that Lawrence of Arabia was one of John Williams' earliest scores until I discovered it's not John Williams. I think it's just John Williams kind of ripped a little bit of it from. I think he incorporated a little bit of into like Raiders of the Lost Ark and and some stuff. But it has that John Williams kind of magic in the soundtrack. The thing was, I watched that movie at such a young age, it almost feels like it shouldn't even count. That's how much I need to review. Like I didn't even realize. I didn't realize until you just mentioned now that it was a World War One movie.
Well, neither did I. I don't remember really very much about it, but
I mainly remember the whole like "no prisoners," and then he like blows a match at one point. That's like that's how sort of sparse it is. But
I really need to rewatch.
But I believe that movie's directed by David Lean, who's famous for directing epics, and another epic war movie he made was. Bridge on the River. Oh, it's gonna kill me. Is it Kwai or is it? It is Kwai, right? Okay, or is it Quay? I don't know.
Kwai.
But that was another one that.
If not, I've been saying it wrong this whole time. But I didn't know that he did both of those movies. That makes a lot of sense though now because I had both of them in a box set of VHSs when I was growing up as a kid, and I've seen. Oh, well, they both have Alec Guinness as well.
Yeah, yeah. And
I've seen Bridge on the River Kwai more than Lawrence of the Arabia. So
I don't know if I've seen it more, but I think I saw it after Lawrence of Arabia, and I remember being a little bit more impressed with it. Also, I found it a little bit more memorable. Like there's just more I took away from it. With that being said, though, I mean, I'm sure I would love Lawrence of Arabia if I rewatched it. It was just I was a little bit too young for it.
I think that's the case for me too. I think I just got bored and probably wandered off when I was in the middle of watching it or started playing with toys. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Bridge on the River Kwai, my dad was always quite a big fan of, and so he made a point of showing it to us when we were kids. And we watched Lawrence of Arabia as well. I just don't remember it half as well.
Do you ever watch kind of those they're considered great war movies, but I don't know if they're necessarily like considered like the most serious gritty war movies, but they are kind of considered classics in their own right. And some of the ones that are coming to mind to me are things like The Great Escape or The Dirty Dozen.
Man, yeah, The Great Escape is one that I've been wanting to check out for a long time as well. Again, it's just like one of those classics that I feel like you have to see.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, but I also was not in like a huge rush to see it again anytime soon, if that makes sense. Like I was kind of like, I got it. Really? I enjoyed it, but I guess it did feel a little bit too Hollywood maybe to me.
Ah, I see.
Like Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen's the main character, and basically he's a cool cat in any movie you see him in, but he was almost a little bit too relaxed in The Great Escape. Like I never really felt like
well, that's interesting where you get some of these different movies that are more stylized than others, and they can be, it's sort of like they show the characters having a little too much fun given the situation that they're in.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is back then war movies were a little bit different. They were kind of more of these sort of propaganda machines to kind of be like, oh, like America's number one and look at how great we are. And, we're always winners. And that was also kind of even how Westerns were for a long time. It was just this kind of, there was no real nuance. It was just sort of like, these are the good guys. These are the bad guys.
Right.
And then sort of around like the 60s and 70s, well, especially the 70s, when we started getting more of the anti-heroes, that's sort of where I feel a lot of these movies started to become a little bit more gritty and realistic and gray as opposed to black and white with their ideas. I personally was actually kind of disappointed with The Dirty Dozen because it just sort of seemed like, again, it was just like this kind of this mission movie, and I don't know, the stakes never really seemed like high enough as far as like we could die at any moment. It was kind of more like you kind of knew some of the guys were going to die, but you knew they were going to solve the mission. It wasn't that far off to kind of where Tarantino kind of went with his Inglourious Bastards movie.
Right. Yeah. And that's like not realistic at all.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess maybe depending on the scene.
But the whole, we're going to get this ragtag team of kind of
who
like,
are just going to go in there and kick and kill Nazis.
And you don't like following the rules. But, and again, this is like, very Dirty Dozen stuff, which normally I'd be all for that. Like, a bunch of misfits who, don't like authority and they're like stuck in this war. I'm like, well, that sounds like what I would be like as a soldier in a war. And it had some actors I really loved in it. Yet, I don't know. I kept waiting for like some really major, like iconic moment or great scene to be like, oh, this is why this is that classic film that everyone talks about. And I never really felt that I got that in the Dirty Dozen.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe there was just other war movies at that time that were so much worse that it just stood out in comparison to the other ones, maybe. But I don't know. I was a little bit disappointed with it in the same way that I was actually a little bit disappointed with Inglourious Bastards. But I don't know. Glorious Bastards wasn't even a movie I was planning on kind of bringing up because it's sort of, it's almost so fantasy. Fictional. Yeah.
Right.
But we can talk about it if you want. There are some great scenes in it.
Another movie that I think was like, again, kind of this Hollywood fun war movie, which was Red Tails. And that was the movie that George Lucas produced, which is actually not a terrible film. I remember when I heard about it and it was coming out, there was a lot of talk that like, oh, this is like a really shitty movie or something. I don't think it was all that well received, but I watched it and I was like, this isn't actually a half bad movie, but it is very much like a Hollywood kind of, the guys are having a little too much fun doing what they do, I guess. It's,
and that's like they're like fighter pilots, right?
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't remember. Did this movie get heavily marketed? Because it just sort of seems like it kind of came in. Like I don't know. I almost don't really remember. It was basically
like entirely independently produced and released by George Lucas. Like he had to fund everything for it, from what I understand. And so considering that, I mean, like it's actually got pretty great effects. Like ILM worked on it. Pretty sure it had all of his companies were working together to produce it, but I don't think it was very well marketed, and a number of things. It didn't have a long theatrical run either, as I recall, or even a very wide release.
Yeah, I briefly just remembered hearing about it a couple of times as essentially kind of like, oh, did you hear like George Lucas is like doing a new thing? And I think I heard like the title Red Tails, and I was like,
he didn't actually direct it, by the way.
Right.
He just produced, financed it, all that.
Did he write it? Do you know?
No.
Oh, okay. So it would have been interesting if he did direct it. That actually might have been the one thing that maybe could have saved the movie, just on a marketing level, just like George Lucas's new movie. I don't know. Maybe that would have helped it.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't know that it would necessarily have been better. Like George doesn't seem to be that keen on directing, to be honest.
I don't think he
doesn't like directing.
I don't think he knows what to do with actors. That seems to be like the main thing. He's
maybe that's
I feel like he knows how to run a crew, and he knows how to get what he wants. It's the human element. Like George Lucas almost seems like an AI machine in a human body or something. and that kind of just seems to be the thing is, also I don't think he even really knows what he's, wanting from his actors. Like as far as like really specifics, that some certain actors are really hungry to get real like detailed feedback on their performance. And I think with George Lucas, it's kind of like, well, if you said the lines and we got it in focus and you said the lines right. And like, I don't think he's like going to really give much more, notes than that. I think he's probably from like the old school, thinking where it's just sort of like, I cast it right. What else do I need to do now?
Yeah, maybe so. And I mean, to be fair, I think that is like half the work is getting the casting right. But, yeah, to me, he seems much more of a technical director who wants to get the shots and maybe isn't as much caught up in the story, the character's performance.
Are there any names in Red Tails? Like any big names?
Yeah, like Cuba Gooding Jr. is in it. Let me see. Terrence Howard. Neo is in it. Michael B. Jordan was in it too. Bryan Cranston is in the movie.
Okay.
So there's a variety of people. I'm maybe some of these other names are notable too. I just don't recognize them.
Have you caught any of these other kind of, because I'm actually a little bit out of the loop, I feel, with some of the newer war movies that I've come across especially in the last 10 years. But if you've seen some of these movies, maybe you can fill me in on if they're worth watching.
I watched War Horse, and I think that's a World War I movie too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little while ago now. I think that's like 2011 or something.
Okay.
Yeah, 2011. And that movie, again, a beautifully shot movie. I just thought it was a little, it's kind of like Spielberg's going through the motions.
That's how I felt from the trailer that I saw.
Yeah, I felt the same way about Lincoln, and that it was kind of like he's doing all of like the Spielberg moves.
Mm-hmm.
How do I even describe that?
Well, sometimes he picks a movie.
It's like Spielberg making a Spielberg movie, but not making a movie. Fuck,
well, the thing
that's a stupid way of putting it. I just don't quite know how to.
There's certain movies that are just.
It's almost like an imitation of his own style, in a sense, and so it seems too designed, going through the motions. I don't know how to.
I just think. As much as there's these guys that we love, like Spielberg and Scorsese, I don't believe that they are just born to make any movie. Not that they're not capable of it, just that there are certain movies that might just have been better suited for other people. And that's maybe the impression I got with especially some of Spielberg's later movie choices, where I'm just sort of like, was Spielberg really the best person to tell this story? Like, sometimes I almost feel like it was like wasted when there could have been something else more worthwhile for Spielberg, or just something that caters more to his strengths. And the same thing with Scorsese. Scorsese has bounced around a lot of genres, but I do feel that there are certain sort of subject matters that he's just stronger with than other ones. Mm-hmm. For example, like I think Spielberg's maybe a little bit better at sentimentality, while Scorsese is a little bit better at that sort of maybe brutal, stark realism. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I'd have to see War Horse.
A good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
And that's very much the way War Horse is, right? It is quite a sentimental, kind of uplifting, supposed to be inspiring sort of movie. There's a lot of just these moments where, for instance, it's like, okay, our hero is like down and out, but now he's having a comeback and things are going to start going good. And yes, he has achieved what he's trying to do. And, the music swells and it just kind of goes through these motions and you're like, okay, whatever. It's just, it's just like too carefully constructed. It doesn't feel like sincere enough. It's like they're kind of trying to manipulate the audience's emotions in a certain way, but they're not doing it transparently. Yeah, is maybe kind of how I would put it.
Well, while we're speaking about Spielberg and war movies, maybe I can bring it back to Saving Private Ryan for a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think Saving Private Ryan is a great war movie, and yet I do think that there are some flaws to it. Like, I don't consider Saving Private Ryan to be the kind of end-all World War II movie, but I feel like maybe a lot of people kind of do sort of feel that is the one.
Yeah, it's not my favorite. Like, there's things that I'm not overly... I feel like there's not a lot to it, for one thing.
Yeah. I'm not really crazy about, like, literally, like, the Saving Private Ryan premise. Like, I don't mind if that was part of it, but just to kind of make the whole... I kind of relate more to the soldiers in the mission being like, what the hell are we doing? We're risking like these like 7 or 8 lives to find one guy, you know? And that's kind of how I felt with watching the movie. Like the thing I think that everybody talks about when you talk about Saving Private Ryan, it's the D-Day, 45-minute sequence at the beginning, which I think we can all agree was amazing. We had never seen war scene depicted like that before, and that is the highlight of the movie, no question. And I think the problem is that the movie never reaches that level again.
Yeah, it kind of tries to go there with some more battle sequences and stuff, but it's like once that one's already been done, and that's kind of the way that I feel about it, is that it's kind of this sequence, a series of really well done battle sequences, but that more or less encompasses the movie.
Mm-hmm. Like, I just feel like emotionally, like I just felt a lot more from a movie like Platoon or even some other, even Apocalypse Now, as opposed to Saving Private Ryan. There's certain parts in Saving Private Ryan that actually come off to me very like kind of Hollywood, almost like a throwback to like the old like 1950s World War II movies. Just like moments where when it's just kind of like the soldiers, it's like the downtime when they're just kind of like soldiering on and kind of like chit-chatting, and you're kind of starting to get to know their characters.
Mm-hmm.
They do kind of seem a little bit like cookie cutter, a bit like, oh, there's the sarcastic guy, there's the wimpy guy, there's the big tough Vin Diesel guy.
A little formulaic. That's probably the right word that I was looking for to describe War
It didn't
Horse too.
feel
It's very
like
formulaic.
what the people back then would have actually, talked and sounded like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right, I hear you for sure.
And it's weird because, so here's another movie that came out right around that same time, and it's almost got the complete opposite strengths and flaws, and that's The Thin Red Line. Did you ever see that movie?
No.
So
was that World War II?
I'm pretty sure it's World War II, because this was the big Oscar. This was the World War II Oscar year, where it was 3 World War II movies nominated and then 2 Queen Elizabeth movies nominated. I remember this very well. This was the Shakespeare in fucking love year.
Yeah,
and everyone was pissed off. And but the war movies were Life is Beautiful, Saving Private Ryan, and Thin Red Line. And Thin Red Line was probably my introduction to Terrence Malick, the filmmaker.
Yeah. Wow, big cast in that movie too.
Oh, yeah. But again, like many of those roles are almost cameos. In fact, I think there's even a lot of A-listers who were basically cut out of the film entirely because there was just a lot of actors who were, at this particular time, Terrence Malick had not made a movie in 20 years.
Yeah.
So there was just a lot of hype, I guess, for actors to jump onto this one, thinking like, oh, like this will be his next masterpiece.
I've never got the whole Terrence Malick thing really. Like, I'm just.
It makes to me it makes sense if you watch his 2 movies from the 70s. Those are probably my 2 favorite Terrence Malick movies.
Well, like, I don't like Days of Heaven, for instance.
Did you see Badlands?
No.
Okay. Badlands is like a Terrence Malick's version of Natural Born Killers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like maybe his least pretentious. The thing that bugs me with Terrence Malick's movies is just like, there's like the ongoing joke where like, you show somebody either nature footage or a Terrence Malick footage, and you have to figure out which is which. Because he just loves to just like.
Well, this is one of the things that I've heard people say about him. He's a great photographer, a great cinematographer. He always puts beautiful images into his film. And he totally does. That is his strength, but I don't really like his movies that much.
Yeah, maybe he should just be a cinematographer and just get someone else to direct his movies. Yeah. And yeah, like honestly, I don't
think of him as much of a storyteller. I
no,
guess.
And to be honest, Thin Red Line doesn't really have much of a story. It's a thin red story. Like the things I remember from it, like I think it was my introduction to I want to say. Is it Jim Caviezel? Is he the one who played Jesus? Yeah. So, but like a lot of the stuff I remember from that movie, it's like, it just feels like the soldiers are on vacation. It's like him like swimming in like the clean like ocean water and being on these like tropical beaches. And I can't remember where it's set, but like it's not your typical, I don't even think it's set in Europe. It might be. Would it make sense that like there'd be stuff going on in like South America maybe at that time?
Yeah.
Or maybe Africa even. I don't know. Maybe they were in sections of Northern Africa. I don't know. But
so let me just read this to you quickly. Adaptation of James Jones's autobiographical 1962 novel focusing on the conflict at Guadalcanal during the Second World War. So wherever that is, sounds like it's in some place.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it might even be. Well, yeah, no, it's probably like South America or Africa or something.
I guess there's a thing, and it's not a bad thing, but I find this with a lot of war movies I watch where they tend to not. be incredibly memorable. It's kind of like you just go through this experience.
Yeah.
And you let the experience kind of just wash over you. Kind of like, I experienced a very short, risk-free kind of feeling of going into war. But then after the movie's over, you almost kind of like forget it all. You're kind of just sort of like, oh yeah, that was an experience I had, but you don't, there's not a whole lot to latch on to. And that's, you would definitely find that if you watch The Thin Red Line, like there's just, I think the idea is like a lot of soldiers probably have no idea what the fuck is going on when they're in war. And so maybe these filmmakers are kind of taking that aspect. It's like, well, they don't know what's going on and you're not going to know what's going on either. But you're there
you're
and
experiencing a lot of chaos and they're just trying to put you in the midst of the action. And yeah, could be something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that is a movie that I'd sort of like to get around to seeing sometime, but I don't know. I tend to be more interested in story-centric movies.
Yeah, it's
story-driven.
I don't think Thin Red Line would make even my top 10 list. Like it's not, again, it's, if you do want to kind of just feel like you're there, it's not, and I saw it in theaters and that helped a lot too. I think if I watched it on the small screen, it would be probably even harder to get through. Yeah. But at least seeing it on the big screen was an experience.
Did you ever watch the movie Patton?
No, that was the other movie. So I was really close to, when I was deciding on All Quiet on the Western Front, I was very close to watching Patton, which by the way was one of Oliver Stone's earliest screenplays.
Oh, he wrote that?
So he wrote Patton.
Oh, fuck, no way.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think.
Interesting.
I believe so. Yeah.
And so Patton, I was going to say, is a very like plot driven sort of movie, you know, because it's all about sort of, you know, this battle takes place and this event leads to that and that sort of thing.
Man, I'm trying to. I hope it is all. That seems like a really
some great dialogue in that movie too. Like you
really
got to check that
maybe
out.
it just seems like that's a really early movie. Like that movie came in 1970s. So
yeah, well, let me see. I don't think that could have been Oliver Stone.
It's probably another director who started as a writer and then went on to some great things.
Francis Ford Coppola was a writer on it.
Okay, that must have been who I was thinking
North,
of.
Ladislas Farrago, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't Oliver Stone I was thinking. Coppola makes more sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Because also Patton isn't Vietnam, right?
No, it's
so
the Second
it would
World
make
War.
it would make no sense for Oliver Stone to do that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, the main thing I just know with Patton is just that kind of famous like poster image of like George C. Scott in front of that giant American flag.
So the movie starts out with him giving this great speech in front of that American flag. It's a great way to start the movie. It's also got really excellent music by Jerry Goldsmith, I'm pretty sure, is the composer.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent theme. But it is totally like kind of, I would say, an American heroism kind of movie.
Yeah.
You know, it's like General Patton is the hero of the movie, you know? And,
yeah. There was another movie that also came out right around that same time. Well, actually, there was
I think George C. Scott probably won the Academy Award for that movie.
I think you're right. Yeah.
It is also a great performance.
George C. Scott, I do not think is an underrated actor, but I kind of feel that he's being a little bit forgotten nowadays. And I'm like, fuck, I wish more people remembered that guy, because he was a great actor. Like he just a great character. Like even if it's like a bad movie he's in, like, you know, he's going to be great in it. He's like a really good screamer.
He's awesome.
He's so good at being angry.
Yeah.
But he's also really good at comedy too. Like even like Dr. Strangelove, which that was another title that I wasn't sure if I even wanted to bring up in this war conversation, because it's kind of a war movie, but it kind of isn't.
I was thinking about that a little bit too. And to be honest, that's another Kubrick movie I still have yet to see.
Oh, okay.
But I was thinking, nah, you know, it's too... Because it's basically like a World War II parody, kind of, isn't it? Would you say? Or?
It's not about World War II at all.
Well, it's about like the nuclear bomb, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, but it takes place during the Cold War.
Oh, the Cold War. Okay, gotcha.
But like, for instance, Dr. Strangelove himself is essentially a former ex-Nazi character.
Oh, okay.
Who also is like, he's a very important character, but he's actually probably Peter Sellers plays 3 roles in the movie, and Doctor Strangelove is probably the character who's got the smallest screen time of them all.
Okay.
But he's kind of like he really kind of pops up near the end. It's a great movie. I won't talk about it too much because it's more of a movie about the bomb and sort of political mismanagement and miscommunications it was a comedy that was based on like a serious book that the more Kubrick was kind of reading into it, he was kind of like, this is kind of like hilarious. Like it's so outrageous. It just kind of kept getting funnier and funnier until he thought, why don't we just literally make it a comedy?
Interesting.
But it was based on a kind of like a scary, like worst case scenario situation of like, this is a way that like nuclear war could just happen and end the world.
Yeah.
But no, there was also like in the early 70s, there was like a few, actually weirdly enough, like some of these were like war comedies. There was MASH. I don't know if you ever saw the MASH movie.
I'm a little bit familiar with it. I haven't like watched a whole lot of it, but
did you ever see Catch 22?
Nope.
Okay, because that's my favorite one of the. I much prefer Catch 22 over MASH, and it's a Mike Nichols.
Is that a show too or a movie?
I believe it's just a movie. Maybe there's a show that has like a spin on that. Maybe there's some show that's got a similar kind of title, but it was based on a famous book. I mean, I remember we read it in high school.
Right. Yeah. From 1970.
Yeah, and it's
Alan Arkin.
Yeah, it's got a crazy cast. Again, Martin Sheen. You can't have a bad war movie if Sheen is in it. But he's got a much smaller role. This is like probably one of his earliest movies. Art Garfunkel has a role in the movie. Bob Balaban, Charles Grodin.
Yeah. Oh, Anthony Perkins is in it.
Anthony Perkins. Orson Welles is in the movie.
Wow. John Voight. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Charles Grodin.
Yeah. No, it's like. It does such a good job of being funny without being disrespectful. I don't know. I'm a big Mike Nichols fan, and especially in this period was like he basically made like 5 classic movies in a row, and this would have been his movie right after The Graduate. So I mean, he was nominated for Best Picture and Director for The Graduate, and for Catch 22, they're like, we'll give you whatever you want, man. Like, and in many ways, it's an epic war movie. It just also happens to be very funny. Because it's all about Alan Arkin, who's the main character. He wants out. He just wants to get the fuck out, and so he keeps trying to like kind of plead insanity, and he keeps trying to do crazy things so that he can convince the people to be that he's unfit to be a soldier. And they're just sort of like, nah, if you're trying to act crazy and you want out of this war, that's like the sanest thing a person can do. And yeah, it's got like some great lines. He uses a lot of the techniques he was doing in The Graduate, where he would sort of overlap the audio from like the next scene would kind of like sort of interrupt the end of the previous scene. And he would kind of do this with editing too. And he does it a lot in The Graduate, but he also then continues this effect in Catch 22. And as much as the movie's funny, there's also some like pretty like legitimate like horrifying moments too that are actually very kind of realistic, and they almost seem more disturbing because they seem almost out of place in this otherwise kind of lighthearted war movie. But yeah, I don't know. I was trying to think. I was like, is this good enough to be in like my top 5? And I don't know if it is, but it's definitely up there. I think it would be in my top 10 for sure. I quite like it, and I think you would enjoy Catch 22. I liked it a lot more than MASH. MASH to me kind of seemed a little bit too immature, and I don't know, it almost like reminded me of like, it almost becomes like a frat comedy movie, like in the way that Animal House does, but it's not as funny. And it's, I don't know, I just didn't connect to, I'm not the biggest Robert Altman fan, but yeah, I don't know, like near the end of MASH, like it ends almost like with a football game, and you're just like, what the fuck? Is this a war movie? Like, what the hell is this? And,
well, I think in general, as a concept of turning a war film into a comedy is an interesting choice, and yet it's kind of something that it takes a real fine touch to be able to pull that off correctly, you know?
Yeah.
And it does bring me to the movie Life is Beautiful, which we've talked about. It's more or less a Holocaust movie, even though like the first half of the movie or so is not doesn't really take place during the Holocaust. But that is a movie that has got a lot of comedic elements going on. And I remember finding it quite like entertaining and funny when I watched it. And I watched it like as a fairly young kid as well, around the time it came out, whenever that was. I should find out. Let's see.
I want to say like 98 or 99.
Yeah, 97 actually.
Oh, okay.
So
Sorry, it would have been
like,
Oscars 98, I
I would
guess.
have been like 8 years old when I watched that movie.
Yeah.
And there's just like it's the main character and the way that he's kind of amusing his son to protect his son from the horrors of this concentration camp that they're in. And, just his whole personality and stuff. He's very funny. And as I recall, the movie's quite funny, but it's also, it just walks this very fine line of conveying this tragedy, but humor within the tragedy. And
and the ending's very like heartfelt.
Oh yeah,
like it's a really kind of like an emotional ending, and it's anybody who is familiar with Roberto Benigni would know that his hero was basically Charlie Chaplin.
Ah, interesting.
And like Life is Beautiful is almost like the great Charlie Chaplin movie that maybe he wouldn't have been able to have made in his time. I mean, the closest thing we could compare it to would be The Great Dictator.
I was going to say The Great Dictator. It kind of has some elements. What do you call? Kind of some familiarity to that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. It's like he took like The Great Dictator and then elements of Chaplin's movie The Kid and kind of combined them together. And then again, also adding like his own kind of Italian sensibilities to it too. What was great was it wasn't none of the jokes in Life is Beautiful is like laughing at like, oh, ha, ha, like the Holocaust, people dying, Jews.
Yeah.
It was it was the context of this man who loves his son more than anything is doing everything he can to prevent his child from the horrific reality of the situation.
Yeah, well, and it's like how he spins it is quite hilarious, right? Like when he's telling him that he's going to win a tank and that they're playing this game. It's like it's quite hilarious just to see how he spins these brutal things.
Yeah, I don't know if it might even have been Kubrick or somebody as respected as Kubrick, who essentially like congratulated Benigni, being like, you've done the impossible, you've done the thing that I didn't think anybody could, which was that you made a truly comedic movie about the Holocaust.
Yeah,
and I think it was Kubrick, but if it wasn't, it might have been another heavy hitter like him, who was just sort of like, yeah, you somehow cracked the code. Like not only did you do it, but you made like an Oscar-worthy movie. I mean, like Roberto Benigni won Best Foreign Film for that. He won Best Actor, which I think kind of shocked a lot of people.
Was he the actor in it? Is like
he stars in like I said, Charlie Chaplin was his role model. So he Roberto Benigni started as a comedic actor and then eventually over time started directing his own movies, which turned out to be his best movies. But yeah, no,
that's a really impressive film. It's a very unique movie too that stands out, and totally think people should give it a watch if they haven't seen it.
And even the whole first half of the movie, which really isn't war related at all. It's just you're kind of just following this love story in Italy.
In many ways,
and that's great too.
It's great because it sets up the stakes for what happens later on. You get to know this character and his romantic relationship with his wife, how much he loves his family, and all that stuff. And setting it up that way is actually is a very effective way of telling the tragic part of the story. Yeah,
I was such a fan of it that I later started to dive into some of Roberto Benigni's other movies that he directed. And they're fun, they're great, but they don't come close to Life is Beautiful. Like that is his masterpiece that will, I think, forever be known as his greatest achievement.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about his other movies. I was just looking at them here.
They're funny. They're just much more like broad comedies. They don't have the there's not quite as much of the sort of powerful, like emotional, sentimental side that Life is Beautiful has. Like, I think he was aware that he was kind of like, I don't think he was making a movie in the attempt of getting Oscars, but he was kind of like, this is, if there's ever a movie that I make that's going to get a bunch of awards, it's going to be this one.
Well, and sometimes you just arrive at the perfect concept, right? And you happen to be the person with the perfect sensibilities to tell that story and tell it in that way, you know?
Yeah.
And it seems like that's kind of what he arrived at with that movie. It's just a very fresh perspective on a story that's been told a lot of times and from a lot of different perspectives. But it's probably like the most unique Holocaust movie out there that I can think of.
Yeah. I've got a bunch of stuff still on my list, but do you want to?
Yeah, no, go ahead and take it wherever you want to go.
Well,
I've just been sort of following this, following the flow of our conversation here.
Okay. Well, there's one I definitely wanted to bring up because I think this one would be on my top 5 list. It's a really brutal movie. It might be maybe the most brutal of the war movies on my list.
Okay.
And it's also a foreign film. It's called Come and See.
Come and See. I haven't heard of that.
It's from the mid 80s, and I mean I'm almost positive that it's a World War II movie. I think it's like we were talking about Prussians. Or Prussia, right?
Oh, okay,
and I think it relates to that. I think it's a Russian movie.
Here, let me read this to you because I just looked it up here. So
sure.
1985.
Yeah.
After finding an old rifle, a young boy joins the Soviet resistance movement against ruthless German forces and experiences the horrors of World War II.
Yeah. I think that sums it up. And so the thing that's interesting about this is the whole movie, you're following this boy who's probably no older than like 12 or 13, and they put this kid through hell. I mean, you could see it in the movie. You're just like, fuck, this kid was like a real trooper. And like by the end of the movie, it's like, he looks like he aged 5 years.
Wow.
But that's the thing is by the end of the movie, you're like, that's the face of war right there.
Yeah.
And it's, what's extra brutal is like, cause it's a little bit of a slow burn. It kind of starts off, There's a big chunk earlier in the movie where he's almost just kind of like wandering in Eastern Europe, kind of in the woods, and he comes across this young girl of the same age, and they kind of just hang out, and it doesn't become like romantic or anything, but they're kind of just kids being kids. And it's the one part of the movie that maybe just has some like just a nice like peaceful moment before things just get really bad. And I don't know, it's one of those movies where it almost feels like a little bit documentary-like. Like it really just feels real and genuine. Like you're kind of, I don't know, when you watch a lot of other movies, you're kind of like, this is a movie, but you watch this one, you're kind of like, this seems like what the experience would really kind of be like. They just don't hold any punches back with this one.
Yeah. And
I mean, I often see this movie on a lot of lists of not really horror movies, but like I'll see it often on like lists of like most controversial movies or most shocking movies or like, you know, most intense war films. And so I was just kind of like, I got to check this thing out. And
you're kind of making me curious to look into it.
Beautiful cinematography. Again, it's just I guess that's just a testament to if these movies are made recently enough, a lot of them do just tend to look really good, even though some of the stuff you're looking at is pretty grotesque. But I don't know, man. I don't know if I've ever seen.
So is it in Russian then?
I believe so. It's not in English.
Okay.
But it's also like a lot of these sort of movies. There's not tons and tons of dialogue. It's again that kind of thing where you're kind of experiencing this thing, and you know sometimes like you know when the kid's in the woods, sometimes there's some like just shots of like the trees and stuff.
Yeah.
And
how many times have you seen this? Because I'm curious.
I've seen it once.
Okay, so going back to what we talked about some of these movies being memorable, do you find it to be memorable? Like you can kind of remember the beats of what goes on?
I mean, I will say I forgot the element about the kid finding the gun at the beginning, but once you reminded me of it, that all came back to me.
Oh, okay.
Because it's just like a neat little like I don't know, for some reason I don't know, I'm a really big fan of kind of like simple but poignant kind of like openings and things in movies, and just something like it's not even, I don't even believe it's the main kid who finds the gun. I think it's like an even younger kid who just digs out this gun and finds it, and you're kind of just sort of like, okay, like this is how we're gonna start the movie. I like this. Like, it's almost like this can go anywhere, but it's like, okay, he's found a gun, and it's just that thing where they're like, yeah, we're gonna send you off to war, man. You're a man now.
Yeah.
And but there's even like, I don't know, there's stuff that happens with the girl that kind of comes back later on. And it is a movie that you're not going to probably want to watch this movie over. It's not that it doesn't have that rewatchability to me the way Platoon does, where I genuinely enjoy the experience of rewatching Platoon. While Come and See is a movie I'm definitely going to watch multiple times, but I'm really going to pace out the distance between the times I watch it, because it's not a feel-good movie at all. Like, the time you're done with it, you're just like, ugh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Don't need to see that again for a while. Because again, it's like an experience. So you're like, yeah, I'm good. I don't need to experience that again for a little while.
Yeah, I hear you.
But it's definitely worth watching. Like, I think anybody who, if you're a big fan of war films, like, this is a must see, because it's kind of a forgotten one, mainly because it's not an English movie, and so it doesn't make a lot of lists, because I think a lot of times they want to just kind of like fill it up with kind of like American war films, but this one is as good as any.
Yeah, and I mean, probably because of the fact that it's also a foreign film, it's like gets a little bit overlooked oftentimes.
But in a weird way, I think I almost, when it comes to these foreign movies, I think I just trust them a little bit more than Hollywood, because Hollywood's like Hollywood films they're built on kind of delivering magic and things larger than life. And I think with these foreign movies, they just aren't really able to do that. So their strength is the complete other end. They're like, let's show them what it was like. Let's make it a little bit more simple, but real.
Well, and the other thing is you get, like, for starters, you get a different perspective from people from different cultures. It's like they haven't been brought up with sort of the Western perspective on the war, so there's that. But the other thing is I think every culture just offers different sensibilities for how you're going to make things. And again, that's one of the reasons why foreign cinema tends to be very interesting, is because the influences are different. And yeah, I don't know. I definitely think it's worth it to check out some of these foreign films for that reason. Again, largely more so because of the perspective thing, though, I think. Yeah.
Well, the nice thing about, like, by having it through the perspective of a child, especially in that movie, is it's like, it felt like it was a fairly, like, unbiased movie. It wasn't trying to do what I do find a lot of maybe more of Hollywood movies do, where they're kind of like, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I mean by the Western perspective, right?
Yeah.
Is it's like, that's kind of what you're gonna get.
It's like with the European movies, it's like a movie like Come and See, it's almost more like the situation is the bad guy, and you, the kid who just got thrown into it, are the innocent.
And that's so often the way that it is with war and stuff, right? Like, there's so many people who just innocent people who want nothing to do with it, but they just kind of get roped into it just because they happen to be in the wrong environment or in the wrong geographic location or whatever. Yeah.
And you're just kind of put in a situation where it's like, kill or be killed. That's the reality that you're in.
There's nothing fair about it or whatever. It's just very circumstantial.
Yeah. I don't know how we're doing for time. I've definitely got like a few other movies on my list, but I bet you do too.
Yeah. Well, we could probably wrap up in the next 20 minutes or so. I mean, we could go on about all these war films forever because there's tons of them. I mean, I wouldn't want to like skip over Schindler's List and stuff because, of course, it's a masterpiece, but it's, we could Schindler's List.
Because we were talking about the idea of maybe doing a two-parter where we could do a POW kind of show, or we could just do them all now. But
that might be an idea at some point. I don't know. There's a bunch that I haven't seen. Like, I've heard Flags of Our Fathers is great. Letters from Iwo Jima. Both Clint Eastwood movies.
Stalag 17 is a pretty fun POW. Well, maybe fun POW isn't really a term we should use all that much, but it's like it's a very, I guess because it was made in like the 50s, it was a little bit more lighthearted.
Okay,
There's actually like some comedic elements because at least in the POW stuff, like they're American soldiers, and they're, at least in this movie, they're depicted like they're, you know, treated fairly well, and you know they're not quite. It's not quite life or death scenarios. It's almost more like just getting through each day in these conditions. And it's almost a little bit like Reservoir Dogs, because part of what Stalag 17 is neat is that they discover that somebody in their camp is actually a secret German soldier who's basically a spy. So it becomes this whole like, it almost becomes like a whodunit movie, like who's the spy.
Yeah, okay.
Also, I can't remember the main actor's name, but for some reason, the poster of Stalag 17 reminds me a little bit of you. There's like a slight,
really?
But not the actor in the movie. Like part of the reason why I actually wanted to watch the movie, I'm like, well, if the guy looks like Kevin, I'm going to enjoy this movie. If this guy looks like Kevin, and I watched the movie, I'm like, he doesn't look like Kevin. But there was something on the poster where there was a slight, like, there's a slight resemblance. I don't know.
Okay. I'm looking at this now.
Like I was like, I could definitely see this being like Kevin's like grandfather.
We
maybe,
got a
or
similar
something.
hairline and a similar chin. And
there you go.
Maybe I tend to. This actually looks a little bit like my face from the Mooks. Cover art.
There you go.
From our podcast cover art. He's holding a cigar. He's
got a cigar. Yeah. But yeah, I can't remember the actor's name, but if you watch the movie, he doesn't really look like you, but they got, I don't know, the angle was a little bit there for the poster. But it was a surprisingly I don't know. I was kind of like, 50s war movie, like because you know those ones
it's in
usually
black and white, right?
Yeah, but it was very. I think it's directed by Billy Wilder.
I was gonna say,
yeah.
I'm looking at these images. It looks like it's like a comedy.
And it's
on Tubi, by the way.
It's not like a laugh out loud, like, oh my god. It's not like a slapstick comedy, but it is like it's a very non-serious war film. If you're looking for something lighter, it's mainly about just these kind of like the dudes, these soldiers who are imprisoned, and they're kind of, you know, ripping on each other and trying to keep their spirits up and find ways to entertain themselves.
Yeah.
There's still like, you know, characters who die and stuff. So it's not like a complete like laugh riot, but if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, then we'll say like Come and See, which is what I was talking about earlier. You know, Stalag 17, is a good one. Yeah. Do you want to talk about I don't know. Yeah. Do you want to talk about Schindler's List then? Or
no, I mean, no, I don't want to, because I don't want to go on and on about every freaking war movie that's out there. But I was just mentioning it as like, it's like, okay, we didn't forget about that.
Well, we haven't touched on Apocalypse Now really yet.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to talk about one more movie, just because I think this is actually a good place to fit this in, and I don't think we're gonna do an episode about it because we kind of missed the boat. But I was thinking about it, and I'm like, well, we could talk about Oppenheimer, because I know you didn't go see it yet, but I did go see it, and I feel like we kind of missed the opportunity to do a full episode about Oppenheimer because it came out months ago now. But obviously, it fits into the World War II territory, and it's another example of just all the many different things that are simultaneously going on during some of these global events, such as a world war. There's just so many things going on, so many stories you can tell, and this is a really fascinating story that you get to hear about the development of the nuclear bomb and everything that went into that, the politics around it.
Is there much? Do you see like is there much like war battle stuff itself in the movie too? Like, do you get much soldier
not really.
things?
No, not much at all. It's mostly like this scientific development stuff and a lot of a lot of behind the scenes politics and whatnot. But what's interesting is, I was kind of expecting the movie to end. I don't want to. I'm gonna try to avoid spoiling the movie for you, but I thought that the whole test detonation sequence was going to be near the end of the movie, and it's actually like there's like a whole other hour after that where they're just dealing with a lot of the politics. But the movie's really well made in that it keeps this momentum constantly flowing, and I've sort of noticed this about Christopher Nolan's style, actually, is that he tends to have these he keeps his scenes very brief, and it just has this steady momentum that's constantly coming at you, which I think for a 3-hour movie it ends up being it holds your attention, you know?
That's good. Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, to be honest, like when I hear kind of like the description of it, it doesn't off the top sound like my kind of movie. As far as it's a lot of talking and these guys figuring things. And again, it's like
a lot of I will say this too. You can get a little bit lost in the dialogue as to like, okay, what's actually going on here? I kind of vaguely know what plot point just occurred, but like you can get a little bit lost and things do kind of go over your head at times. But I found it thoroughly engaging the whole way through. I definitely, that was one of the big movies of the year that I have been interested in checking out. Although, you know, it's funny, we're talking about Christopher Nolan. There's actually an even more suitable movie to bring up based on our show tonight. Of his Dunkirk? Is that what you were going to talk about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as kind of like war and soldiers and stuff, I mean, that'll probably be the one that is his war, like his war movie. I don't know if he'll do another one after that, especially after Oppenheimer. I wouldn't mind rewatching Dunkirk because I only saw it once. Yeah. But when I kind of watched it, I was kind of had mixed feelings after it was over. I thought it was good, but I guess I was comparing it to a lot of other Christopher Nolan movies that are also very good. And as the more I think about it, the more I'm kind of like, you know what, there was some really impressive stuff in that, and I think it deserves a second watch to kind of just sort of see what he was doing with that movie, because I guess I wasn't expecting it to be a movie that was kind of, especially in like the later part, it kind of gets really, or maybe it's the entire movie is this sort of system where it's really kind of just broken up between almost like 3 or 4 different storylines, kind of all happening simultaneously, and you're constantly switching back and forth between them all, to the point that they're almost all like their climaxes are even happening around the same time, which is probably when the movie's peaking in excitement. But it was also kind of like so much to take in the first viewing that I kind of feel like maybe I didn't take it all in, or I need that sort of second viewing to kind of now like appreciate what I saw the first time. But I don't know. Yeah. I mean, what were your thoughts on Dunkirk?
I wasn't like overly crazy about it, but perhaps like you say, it's worth revisiting to get a more thorough perspective on it. To me, it was just kind of another example of a war movie that does a good job of realistically putting you in the midst of a historical battle, right? But it's kind of like, okay, how many times do I need to see that? And I tend to prefer when Christopher Nolan's coming up with an original story. So I'm sort of like, man, now he's just doing a historical war movie. You know, I'm a little bit tuned out for it. So it didn't really have a huge impression on me, but impressively made and that sort of thing. His movies are always well done from that. I think
I was watching like it was an interview with Tarantino, who I guess he kind of changed my mind a little bit about Dunkirk, or made me kind of appreciate it a bit more, because I think in Tarantino's view, I think he was even saying that Dunkirk might have been, it might even be his favorite Christopher Nolan movie.
It's definitely not mine.
It's definitely not mine either, but I guess he felt so strongly about it that he did make enough points about it that it did make me appreciate the movie more than I originally had.
Okay.
I think one of my issues that I had with it the first time viewing it was it didn't really seem like it was because there were these mini storylines overlapping each other. You never really seemed to have been focused on a main character. It almost was like these kind of each one of these protagonists kind of got like a chunk of the story, and then you never really were able to kind of just settle in falling in with the main character. And the characters in that movie, their storylines in of themselves weren't really elaborate enough to really care about them.
Okay.
It's like they kind of reach these like there's the kind of like the guy who's in the I think he was like the fighter pilot, you know, then he kind of crashes in the water and like, you know, they're all kind of doing their things and you're like, oh, this is suspenseful, or at least I know that I'm supposed to be in suspense. I just wish I could care about these people more who I haven't really had enough time with to figure them out.
Yeah.
But
yeah, because there's maybe just too much going on. Hey, it's
well. Also, I wasn't very familiar with the Dunkirk story. I guess.
Me neither.
So that's
it's not a very like personal story for how you relate to the characters and stuff. Much like, I don't know, what would be an example of one that is more personal.
I guess I appreciate more on a technical level more than anything, which I guess that's probably how I feel about most of Christopher Nolan movies. I really appreciate the technical aspect.
Yeah, okay.
But there's also something about his movies that do leave me a little bit cold.
Yeah, I could see that.
My favorite Christopher Nolan movie was always Memento. Like, that's the one where I just think is the most impressive script writing of his movies.
That.
Oh, okay. It's different. It's stylistically, it's maybe he hadn't fully found his voice yet, but it's a movie that I'm just very impressed with, just the structure of that particular movie. I haven't seen anything since Memento that's been like that. So.
That's actually something that I kind of like about Oppenheimer, which was a little bit of a surprise. It's like, I mean, it's not that it's structured in such a bizarre way. It's just, it kind of has this roundabout way of telling this story and finishing off this arc. So, man, I don't know exactly what I can say without spoiling anything for you, but there's like the relationship of Oppenheimer's character to Einstein and to this other guy, Strauss, and kind of the philosophy of the movie, the philosophy that the characters have in their relationship to this bomb that they're building, and the final line of the movie just really hit me. I thought it was like quite profound. I love the way that it ends, and their way of kind of coming around to that through telling all of these kind of showing all these different perspectives that are going on simultaneously, and how they're all interconnected, and then bringing it around to this final point at the end of the movie, I thought was just really, really well crafted. And I think that that's something that Christopher Nolan tends to put quite a lot of attention into, is how he crafts his story and then how he goes about telling it as well. And I don't know, that's just something he does really well. And he does it in a lot of unique ways. You know, obviously Memento is one such way. I think The Prestige does that in a pretty intelligent way. Tenet does that. I wasn't crazy about Tenet, but maybe that's partially because it was a little bit confusing to me.
Even Inception and Interstellar play a lot with time and structure.
Yeah,
So what are your thoughts on Apocalypse Now?
The fuck? You just like go off into left field?
No, I'm like, what are your thoughts on Apocalypse Now?
Oh, okay.
No.
Is that a real question? You want to know?
Oh, I don't know. I'm guessing the feeling that you're not crazy about it, right?
No, it's not that I think it's just that I'm sort of unfamiliar with it. Like, you and I went and saw it. Didn't we like go to the Rio Theater to check it out that one time?
Yeah.
And that was like my first time watching it.
Yeah.
To me, it's such a bizarre sort of, it's almost like a dream, you know? It's a strange sort of like dream film, because it's bizarre where they end up in the end when they're at like that tribal place where Marlon Brando's hanging out, and it's not what I would expect from a Vietnam War film.
Yeah, well, it's so it's. I mean, again, it's based on a book that is not in any way based on Vietnam. So,
Right,
that in
right.
itself, like, I don't think
Well,
they were.
that was a fascinating bit of information because I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so the joke was in. I don't know if you're familiar with John Milius, who's a writer and director in his own right, but he wrote Apocalypse Now. He also wrote and directed like Conan the Barbarian and Red Dawn.
Oh, okay. So he wrote the book Apocalypse Now?
No, he wrote the screenplay.
Oh, gotcha.
Basically, it was a challenge in script writing school where all these people have always tried to adapt Heart of Darkness, like going back to like Orson Welles, and they were just like, this is the unfilmable, the unadaptable story. It can't be done. So John Milius was like, fuck you. I'm going to prove you all wrong. I'm going to be the one to adapt Heart of Darkness. And then while Vietnam was still going on at the time, so he was like, okay, well, I'll make this about Vietnam. Like, and you also have to realize, like, at this particular time, like, there was no Vietnam movies. Even when Apocalypse Now came out, when Apocalypse Now came out, Deer Hunter was the only other Vietnam movie that was made up to that point. And that was only like a year or two before Apocalypse Now.
Okay, gotcha.
I don't know if you've seen Deer Hunter, but
no, that's been on my list for a while too. But again, it's like 3 hours. It might even be like 3.5 hours or something.
yeah,
It's a long ass movie.
And I didn't really even want to include it in this list because it's more about, it's like there's like an hour of character development before any war stuff. And then there's maybe like an hour of war stuff, and then there's like an hour of post like war stuff where like, you know, they're coming back to America. So to me, like the war element is really only just like there's more Vietnam War stuff in it than say Forrest Gump, but the majority of the Deer Hunter is not a Vietnam movie. But anyways, yeah, with Apocalypse Now, so yeah, John Milius was just sort of like, okay, fuck you, I'm going to try to adapt this story, but it really wasn't trying to do commentary on Vietnam. It was just using Vietnam as a device.
Yeah, almost like the setting.
Yeah, it could have been any war, but they were like, well, this is the war of our generation, so this would be the most fitting way to not only adapt Heart of Darkness, but to also maybe make the great Vietnam movie.
So is Heart of Darkness a war movie? Like
it's a book written by Joseph Conrad, I think in like the 1800s.
And does it take place around like a different war or something?
Yeah, I'm not sure what war it is, but it is essentially the basic plot line of this soldier who's leading a group of men where he's been assigned to assassinate another brilliant soldier who's gone crazy. Okay. And so that to me is like as much Apocalypse Now is as much a movie about insanity as it is about war. Right. Maybe it's more about insanity in many ways, but also the craziness of war.
Mm-hmm. And kind of what it drives a person to.
Yeah. But the idea has always kind of been, both in the book and the movie, is that like you're going into the heart of darkness, you're going into Dante's Inferno, into hell.
And maybe that's what makes it feel like a dream to me, or maybe the more appropriate term would be a nightmare, but it feels like I think it kind of takes you on a little bit of a psychological ride, you know?
Yeah, and a psychedelic ride too.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say.
Like, did you know that there's actors who are actually on LSD for real in that movie? Mm-hmm. I mean, their characters are supposed to be on LSD, but the actors were too.
And weren't there like people taking some of these types of drugs when they were in the actual battlefield?
Well, that's what I mean. Maybe not so much the fighting battle scenes, that might have been a bit tricky, but just like a lot of sequences where they're just like spaced out, like on the boat, looking at like kind of fireworks going off.
But I'm not just talking about in the movie. I'm talking about actual soldiers who are fighting in Vietnam.
Sorry. Yeah. You mean in real life when Vietnam was going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely, they were smoking pot, they were doing acid.
It's crazy.
Just whatever they can kind of get their hands on, right?
Yeah.
And
can you imagine having like your senses that, heightened by drugs?
I think
when you're in that environment, in that super tense situation already.
You know, it seems so crazy, but it probably makes sense, because when you're in the stage where you're every day, you're so fearful that you're like, any day now I could die. Maybe a lot of these soldiers like have already like decided like, I'm not going to make it through this. So might as well just enjoy, get as much fun and enjoyment and peace as I can while being in this fucking mistake of a lifetime I made.
I just don't think that it would give you a lot of peace.
Well, especially the acid one. Especially the acid one.
I would think it would just take you on a complete nightmarish roller coaster, to be honest.
Yeah,
but
I was probably, I can't imagine that tons of them were doing it. It just seems like so, like you would be completely useless as a soldier, as well as like just dangerous. You could easily, you'd probably start killing your own men or something. But I think it was probably more so a lot of drinking and a lot of pot. Probably more so than the acid thing. Also, there's a documentary. The making of Apocalypse Now is also called Heart of Darkness,
right?
And
I started watching that too. I really want to finish that because that seemed like a pretty fascinating counterpart to the movie.
Well, that was a good 3 or 4 years of production. Apocalypse Now had it was one of the records.
Disaster project too. Hey, just like plagued by a lot of difficulties.
Yeah, there was hurricanes that were tearing down their sets that they had built, and luckily it was a disaster that at least ended up with a masterpiece movie, because sometimes you have a disaster and it just destroys the movie.
Yeah, the movie just doesn't come out, or it just ends up terrible.
Yeah. But the thing that I found... It's
actually quite amazing that they pulled it off when you think about it. It's like...
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's the thing is Francis Ford Coppola was going crazy in the process of making a movie about a person going crazy, and maybe that's what actually kind of helped.
Martin Sheen kind of going crazy too?
Oh yeah, well there's the famous scene in the beginning where they filmed it on his actual 40th birthday, and he's not acting, he's getting blackout drunk, and then he's dancing and he
doing
punches
kung fu or something,
and then he punches his reflection in the mirror and cuts up his hand.
Yeah,
and they show you the extended cut of that in the documentary, where at the end he's just crying in a bloody bedsheet, and they just two guys just wheel him off essentially. And it was that was originally cast with Harvey Keitel, who they had to fire after a week or so of shooting because it wasn't working out. It was kind of like Eric Stoltz in Back to the Future. They're just sort of this isn't jiving, and so they replaced him with Martin Sheen. But the thing I love about Apocalypse Now is, again, it's not that strong on plot. The only thing you need to know about the plot is that they have a mission where they have to find Marlon Brando, and Martin Sheen has to kill him, and the other guys don't even know about this. But it's the fact that the movie, it's almost like a series of war sketches. They're all these non sequiturs that really have nothing to do with anything else, but they're all just their own little sequences that to me are very memorable, and just kind of showing the randomness of war, and everything from Chef going off the boat with Martin Sheen, and they're trying to find a mango tree because he's a chef who makes sauces, and they don't find a mango tree. Instead, a fucking tiger jumps out, and they run back on the boat. There's another part where they come across another boat, and they think that they're smuggling weapons or drugs, and they shoot them all down just to discover it was a puppy that they then take on board. And the movie's just filled with all these little moments. There's the part where the Playboy Playmates are coming to entertain the soldiers, and then they have a little rendezvous with them. I'm not sure which version we watched, because I'm also familiar, there's a Redux version, which is the director's cut, which has a lot more of the movie in it. I don't know.
Whatever was playing in the theater that day, I guess.
Yeah.
It was a good way to see it, though, too. It was cool to see it on the big screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love the Doors music in it, having the end.
Like you said, the good soundtrack that you can use for that time period.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on? I'm pretty sure you haven't seen this movie, but it's the only other kind of Vietnam movie that probably everyone's are they going to talk about it? Did you ever see Full Metal Jacket?
Oh no, that's another one of the. Yeah, I think I've seen parts of it, but not enough to really. Might as well just say that I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
it's another one of those Kubrick movies I haven't gotten around to.
Yeah, it's got some great stuff, but to be honest, it's not one of my favorites.
Well,
I find
it didn't really appeal to me. I would much sooner watch Doctor Strangelove. I'd much sooner watch Barry Lyndon. I'd much sooner watch. Let's see, what else haven't I seen? I haven't seen Paths of Glory.
Right. Yeah.
So.
With this Full Metal Jacket, it's the entire movie should have been about soldiers in training, because that's the first half of the movie, and it's pretty much everybody agrees it is the strongest half of the movie.
Yeah, that's where you always get the references from too, right?
And part of the thing that I don't like about the second half, when they're actually soldiers fighting, it's just a small little detail. Maybe this won't be an issue for you, but with me with Vietnam, it's like I want them in the jungle. I want to see them in green, leafy surroundings. But Stanley Kubrick never liked leaving England, so he decided to try to make England pass for Vietnam.
Yeah, that works.
It's just this depressing, like, it looks like it looks closer to like them being in the Gulf War.
Yeah,
it's like just dry and sandy, and the there's just overcast, and I don't know. To me, I'm just sort of like, it doesn't look like at all like Vietnam. It looks like something else, and so that was like a big issue for me. The movie just also doesn't really have the most satisfying ending. It's not as ambiguous of an ending as like The Shining, but it's still like an ending where you're kind of like, what? So I know a lot of people, they always like to lump it in there with Apocalypse Now and Platoon, but I personally do not find it nearly as enjoyable. I find it to be half a good movie, and then the other half to be pretty kind of average.
Yeah, there's a reason I haven't really bothered to go out of my way to watch it yet.
Half Metal Jacket, that's all you need to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I mean, we've covered quite a few movies here. We're running over 2 hours. So
oh shit! Is there any other titles on yours? Because I'm pretty much good. But do you have anything else you want to maybe briefly chat about?
There's lots of stuff we could talk about, but I don't really want to bring any of it up. I think we've talked about a lot. Like The Pianist was one that I saw back in the day and thought was quite a good movie. But I'd like to rewatch it. A bunch of these I'd like to rewatch that I, saw many years ago and think are totally worth watching. But I think we covered quite a few of good recommendations for people. In more recent times, like I watched The Imitation Game, which is really interesting. Another just fascinating story that's about like the solving of the Enigma puzzle or whatever, the Enigma code thing.
Battleship Potemkin.
No. Great! I have seen that.
Oh, you have? Oh shit! I was kind of just.
We watched that in film school actually, and that we had a good little study of that. Just like kind of on the principle, the lesson of cutting and juxtaposing images, and how you can like tell a story through the technique of Soviet montage. I
finally watched it just like last year, and it was like a very good restoration, and I was fucking really. I had heard so much about the movie. I even knew the famous things, but I was surprisingly impressed. For a silent movie of the 20s, I was very impressed with what I saw.
Quite engaging, actually.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the movie Atonement?
I've definitely seen a scene from Atonement.
Oh, was that the long tracking shot maybe that you would have seen, or?
Well, Atonement's it's the one where like Hitler kind of has his little like meltdown scene.
No, you're thinking of Downfall.
Oh shit, Atonement.
That one's great too. I would totally recommend watching.
What's
Downfall.
Atonement about?
Atonement was a movie. It had Keira Knightley and what's his name? That
not Daniel Craig.
No, not Daniel Craig. Hold on. It's on the
I definitely haven't seen it. I haven't seen it, but do you recommend it?
It's directed by Joe Wright. Do you know who Joe Wright is?
No, maybe I know his other works, but it doesn't ring a bell.
He directed Pride and Prejudice in 2003, I think.
Okay.
2004, maybe. Or maybe it was 2000. I don't know. But he did that. Then he did Atonement. He did Anna Karenina. He did The Darkest Hour more recently, I think, which is about... that famous Winston Churchill.
Yeah, no, I funny enough, I don't think I've actually seen any of those movies.
Oh, okay. He's a great director, actually. He's got a real strong sense of what he does. Not all of his movies are great, but he's done some really good ones. And Atonement is quite a good movie. It's I would definitely recommend checking it out. But it sort of takes place around the environment of war, and James McAvoy is the actor who's in it.
Oh, okay.
Gets
I like James
sent off to
McAvoy.
war.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'd totally recommend checking it out. It's a good one. But I don't want to go through absolutely everything. There's lots of great movies we could talk about. Casablanca, for instance, is kind of a war movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fury, I've heard, is good, and I've been meaning to watch that.
I was meaning to bring that up because I thought maybe you would have seen that. And
no, I still haven't.
And I've been kind of thinking about checking that one out too. Well, if you're able to get the light on, I'm just curious. I can't really look at my list, but I've got so many things that we're not going to talk about, but I'll just start throwing... I'll just start shouting some titles in here.
Over them.
Hurt Locker, Jarhead, Black Hawk Down, Casualties of War.
A lot of these are more like modern warfare movies, hey?
Well, I mean, they're a lot of these
like
are
Hurt Locker is, Black Hawk Down definitely
and
is.
Jarhead, yeah, those are all. That's the funny thing was, Three Kings. I'm not crazy about Gulf War movies for them. Again, like I don't mind them, but they're not. When I look at my favorites and top war movies, I don't. And again, I think it's that thing where it's like I feel like I'm on Tatooine. Like I'm not crazy about just you're in this like desert nothingness.
I know I'm not into the whole desert environment as much either.
Yeah,
I like the like European winter miserable stuff, like what we watched today. You know, I tend to be more drawn to the European setting.
Yeah. But, I think we've covered it all for. Well, the cool thing is like we've got so many things that we didn't cover. We could easily do another war episode down the road.
Yeah, maybe we will. I don't know if we'll get in enough time to do it, but it's a possibility.
Yeah,
we'll see. But I'm glad we got to talk a little bit about Oppenheimer too. I wanted to mention that and talk about what I thought was impressive about it, and some really excellent sequences in that movie, like just where he's kind of coming to grips with this thing that he's created, and he's having sort of these hallucination scenes where he's like in front of a crowd talking about this achievement, and this is like after the successful bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he's just kind of envisioning all this death and destruction that has been caused by his creation.
Oh, he's having like a Sarah Connor moment, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just really well done, quite effective.
Well, I remember hearing, Robert Downey Jr. kind of had a pretty bold statement where he was saying that it was essentially the best project that he's been involved with. And I don't think he just means like the experience. I think he's like saying it's literally of all of his movies, this is the best movie he's been in. And I don't... That might be a tall order for me to agree with, but
really great performance for him too, because he does. I didn't even realize it was him when I first saw him come on screen. He's sitting there in close up talking, and I'm like, didn't even dawn on me that it was him.
Oh yeah, he's. I don't know how many people like understand how talented he is. Like ever since I saw him in Chaplin, I was just sort of like, Robert Downey's got the goods. Yeah,
that's true.
But he doesn't always get to show those talents off, because he's so good at being like a cocky Tony Stark type. Right. That it's nice though that Christopher Nolan gave him a nice meaty part.
Wasn't he the guy who played the black man in frickin'
Tropic Thunder, which was another one that I was like debating. Do I even want to bring up Tropic Thunder? Because I was just like, it's just that the fact it's not really like a real war.
Well, that's another great example of a comedy taking, making a comedy out of a war film, right?
Yeah. In some ways, to me, Tropic Thunder might almost be like the last truly great comedy maybe we had. I don't know. It was definitely a really good one, and it's been hard to find some since then. But yeah, no, it's that fine line of of finding the right things to make fun of while avoiding other things that just maybe wouldn't work in a comedic setting.
Yeah.
But yeah, sure. Tropic Thunder, I thought did a really great job of it. And not only that, but just also a movie that parodies just the genre of war films themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, it's been great getting to revisit a bunch of these and think about them. And then I've even written a number of them down of ones that I would like to watch over the next week or so. Rewatch, and then some of the ones that you've mentioned, I'm like, damn, I'm going to check some of these out. So hopefully our listeners found that informative, and it introduced them to some titles that they maybe weren't familiar with, and they'll go check them out for themselves. Otherwise, I think we can wrap this up.
Yeah, this will pretty much be the end of it for us, but what we're going to do is we're going to leave the recording going for 20 minutes of silence out of respect to all of the veterans out there. So we're
Excellent.
done now, but yeah, Kevin, you just keep that thing rolling, and hopefully they'll just listen to 20 minutes of silence out of respect
Yes.
to your grandparents.
If you don't listen to the 20 minutes of silence, then clearly you have no respect for veterans. You have no appreciation for,
You might as well just unsubscribe right now, because we don't want anything to do. Actually, no. Please keep listening. Tell your friends to subscribe. We need all the support. Yeah.
Yep, we'll take anyone we can get.
Yeah.
But on that note, I think we will sign off. My name is Kevin Rosmer,
And I'm Oliver Drawson.
and we hope you have yourself a good night.
Never forget.